So now that we have our pleat in place, I'm going to start basting down the shoulder. So I need to make sure that the lining is free for me to be able to access the shoulder seam, just like the facing. So we're going to begin by starting midway across the shoulder at the same height as where my facing is tacked in. And then I'm a couple of inches around the armhole, I can feel through it. I'm going to baste down in this swooping motion. Again, including little bubbles of fullness as I come along. Staying a couple of inches again away from my armhole. My next baseline is going to run down a couple of inches behind where my front lining needs to sit on my facing, and it's going to come all the way down in this motion. Again, including little bubbles of fullness, and the fullness that I'm including is being pushed up and pushed widthways. So in this direction, that way. So I'm creating length and I'm creating width. Again, these are small amounts. Make sure that your coat is taut as you're doing it. And stop at the same height as your other baste. Now your last baste is going to secure the front of your lining. Twist it round, start at the bottom, again a couple of inches up from the bottom. Make sure that you've got a little bubble of fullness coming in that way, so you're not pulling it taut to the edge, and you're basting along that line that you drew. As you go up, make sure that the little bubbles of fullness that you included across this section are being kept in place parallel to where you inserted them. Don't be tempted to pull all that fullness up. It needs to be maintained. as you get up to the point where your facing is no longer stitched in place, we're going to begin stitching the lining only to the facing, not catching the canvas. So I can place a ruler underneath and keep that line going all the way to the top. So, our last line is going to come through the middle of our side body. This time around, we're going to get the shape out of our side body by splitting the coat like that. So getting all this length out, making sure that it's laying flat, laying the side body in place, and we're going to baste down through here all the way to about there. Again, little bubbles of fullness as you go along. Now we turn our fore part the other way around, cut about 2 inches of lining off, and leave a good inch all the way around here, which we already have. And we can trim the shoulder lining to the same level over here. Leave that tack in place for the pleat, and then as we come into this section of the armhole here, we're going to leave a good 1/2 inch all the way around. Like so. And that's our fore part lined. Here we have our back lining, which we're going to lay into the wrong side of our back. To start off with, we're going to begin basting down the centre back seam and putting that in place, including little bubbles of fullness, and one baste down the middle all the way down, and then we're going to turn the lining over into the vent and begin forming it before attaching it to the back. So to start off with, we find our notches which we place on our lining and line them up height-wise along the back. We then lay the centre back seam on the centre back fold on the centre back seam and begin basting down it. Start a couple of inches down from the top of the back. And again going down the seam, making sure your centre back to centre back with little bubbles of fullness as you go along. If you had a full jacket, you'd have your centre back seams sewn together, split open, and so this inlay here would obviously be folded back with the opposite inlay folding the other way, and this fold would be sitting on top of that pressed open seam. And you can stop a couple of inches up from the bottom. Like so. We're then going to place a silicia stay in the bottom of this mat. Cut your stay 1.5 inches wide. Make sure it's the same length as your back. And lay that in to the back as you did the one on the fore part. What we're going to do though is we're going to try and ensure that there is no overlap between the stay and the fold on our vent. So the fold on our vent is going to take place on this basted line, which sits a seam back from the mark stitch there. So we're going to line it up to that line and cut it to size. Like so. We then displace that back, a good 1/8 of an inch, and sew it in place just like on the back. The stay would then get tacked into place on the inlay, which would be folded over. And then you'd continue laying it in place. a full coat, this would be one piece. You can then trim your inlay back to 1 1/4 inches. Like so. And you can start beginning to fold your vent back. Now, this is my vent balance mark. I'm going to begin tacking it 1 inch below from there. So folding it back to the line to which we basted our Silesia stay. 1 inch down, I'm going to begin basting this in place. Like so.
Do you have a light in that corner?
We then put one last base in place, coming down here and running down the coat. Again, using little bubbles of fullness into the lining. And I'm staying a couple of inches away from my side seam. Lastly, to finish this off, we're leaving off the trim, leaving a 1/4 inch above here, a couple of inches across the shoulder, and 1/8 inch, good 8, down the back. Like so. I've now got my forepart and my back, and I'm going to attach them together. I'm going to lay my forepart down, my back on top, and then grab a sleeve board and begin basting them in place. I've now secured my sleeve board, my side body, with the linings out of the way, so they're flopping down, they're not in there, they're removed. And I am going to flop the linings out of the way on my back. I'm going to mark in here where my vent tack is, and I can see the mark across there. I'm going to put a little chalk mark in place, and then going to line my notches in place and sew all of these elements together, making sure that I mark stitch on mark stitch or raw edge to mark stitch. So mark stitch on mark stitch here when you've got inlay, and raw edge to mark stitch over here when you don't have inlay, sewing 3/8 of an inch back, either from mark stitch or raw edge. It sounds more complicated than it is, but it does make sense once you start putting it into practice. So starting off by lining up my notches at the waist, and then at the vent, and beginning to stitch everything in place. Another reminder, I'm not catching any lining here, I'm just catching top cloth to top cloth, right side to right side. So you can either sew slightly bigger than 3/8 or slightly smaller than 3/8 so that you don't stitch into your baselines and that they're easier to remove. Again, matching my notches up and stitching the rest of my back into place. Base that all the way up into the inlay. And back tag. You can now go and machine this stitch into place, stopping at your vent. All the way from the top, 3/8 of an inch down, stopping at your vent. Now before we start removing the base and begin putting the linings back together, we're going to come to the press board. We're going to move our linings out of the way and we're going to stretch our side seam inlays. In order to do this, a little bit of steam and give just the inlays a little stretch. You can pull fairly hard here, and this will prevent the coat from having any disturbances due to tight inlays in this area. Just curling it round and stretching it, ensuring that all of that is nice and loose. And then you can see it accumulate over there with little flutters. We're now going to press these seams open. So eliminate all the shape as you go along. Starting up here, press it open and then let it fold over to one side at the top of the back side. This is obviously after having removed your base. And use the sleeve board to press full sections out so that you can get all the shape away and you're not ruining the fit of your coat. Press only up until the vent point and then remove your forepart and continue pressing down the fold of your vent. Once this is in place, you can begin folding your underside of the vent over, lining up your marked stitch line 3/8 behind your vent opening, and then slowly folding your inlay into place. Once everything's sitting nice and flat, you can then begin basting down your linings. The first step is to baste down the linings on the back. Bring these forwards. And simply curl the linings back all along this edge. With the top of the vent here, laying the linings in, allowing for a little bubble of fullness there, and folding them back 1/4 behind where your vent is folded. Again, allowing for a little bit of length in the lining, and going all the way down. And you can stop at the same height as your other bastes. And then follow that line down with your iron for ease later on. And then continue that line, folded lining, all the way back. This time heading up the seam, ensuring little bubbles of fullness as you go along. As you get to the top of the pack, you can then let that lining splay out. Press this into place. And then go to your full part. lay your vent in place, again matching a seam back from your mark stitch line to your vent, a couple of pins, to make sure that that position is firmly in place, like so. Then reverse your coat and begin stab stitching the vent in place. Make sure that that's all sitting nice and flat and that your linings on the forepart are out of the way, so they're pushed this way. You can see here I've got them lying out of the way. I then trace a line of chalk going from the vent at a slight angle and stopping where the inlay stops. Grab some black thread and begin stab stitching, or prick stitching this line in place. So drawing a line heading down to relieve the tension on this point and stopping as you can feel the inlay in place there. Get some black thread and begin stab stitching or edge stitching that in place. When you get to the end, pull through and tack off. And then release your pins and begin securing the linings down on the side body. Lay your back in place. Grab your side body linings. Make sure that your coat is laying nice and flat. And from the top of your side body, of the bottom of your side, you can begin securing these lines in place. Just going to press this out. Grab some basin cotton. Lay everything nice and flat. And assess where you need to fold this over. So we need this to come into the vent over here and down. So we're going to place it approximately over here. Make sure that you've got a little bit of excess length in there. cloth is pulled nice and taut, and begin basting down. Catching only the lining, not the cloth that sits beneath. And making sure that you're heading in the general direction that you want to. Again, I'm pulling everything, making sure that there's no tightness occurring in the coat. And then leap slowly onto the underside of your vent. Making sure that there's no tightness, and continue basting down. You can leave an 1/8 of an inch lip between your lining and the edge of that folded undervent. And then stop your bastes at the same height as all the other bastes on the bottom of your coat. So here we have the bottom of our coat with our linings still flapping. So we're going to make sure that we've sewn this right. We're going to put a little bit of a chalk mark down here, 3/8 in from our mark stitch, and make sure that our vent is the right length. And we haven't stretched it or sewn it badly. And here you can see that my mark stitch lines up with that line 3/8 in, so it is. So all is well. So we can begin folding back the vent on the back, the bottom of the back. So simply do exactly the same as on the 4 parts. One baste right down the bottom. And then fold this section back to prevent it from showing through. Make that flat. And then proceed with your base along the top. You then press this in place and cross stitch it, just like on the full part. And then fell this section here. Our next step is to trim this back to a couple of inches. And then to fold it up. Now we want to start by finishing off this corner of the back. So, folding your lining up. With about a ½ inch visible on the bottom of the coat. Like so. And down. This. Keep that ½ inch going all the way down to the bottom of the coat. Starting it off from the bottom like so. And then after about an inch or an inch and a half, leaving an access into the lining of about a ½ inch. Like that. And then continue basting down all the way along. Make sure that you're including a little bit of fullness lengthways as well. Once you get to the end, you go to the other side and do exactly the same. Like so. This means that you will have a lip of lining which will account for any length that we haven't included within the back, just in case our linings are tight. I'll do it for you now. So, and then we just do the bottom on this side. Again, taking that down. And folding up. Getting about a ½ inch visible. Basting to the bottom of the coat. about an inch, making sure that there's no tightness in there. And then again, creating that access of about ½ inch as you go along, ensuring that you've included a little bit of fullness within the length in this section. And again, as you get to the end, about an inch away from your front edge, come back down to the bottom and secure the front in place up to your last baste. And that is your coat lined. So we're now going to close our shoulder seams. In order to do this, we're going to quickly mark our neck point, our shoulder end, and our shoulder seam. And we're going to mark a point on each end, 3/8 of an inch down, where that's going to be sewn together. We then grab our back shoulder and mark the lines through to the other side. So grab my forepart, lay it flat, grab my back and flip it over, fold my lining out of the way, and I'm going to mark my neck point into this side and my shoulder end into this side, and I'm going to mark them 3/8 of an inch down. So as I can see here, I've got the line for my back neck there. 3/8 down from there I find the intersection, and I mark that through to my India tape. So I've just, to show you more accurately, I've chalked down the first part of my back neck, and I found the intersection with that mark stitch line and the 3/8 from the raw edge, and I put a pin in there and mark that point in, like so. I cross it in. I then do the same on my shoulder point, the intersection with my mark stitch and 3/8 down from that, and find the intersection on the other side once it's transferred over. So now that I've transferred those, on the undertip side. So now that I've transferred the intersections on front neck and front shoulder end, back neck and back shoulder end, I'm going to match those crosses up. So I lay the crosses on top of the crosses with that flipping motion that I've shown you before, making sure they match up perfectly, and I pin them in place, but only to the top cloth. I don't want to pin the canvas or the lining or facing down. Only the top cloth is getting pinned. I do the same on the shoulder end. Use that flicking motion to make sure that everything is matching up, and then I pin it in place only to the top cloth. You'll then find that there's an amount of fullness that you're going to need to ease in, and we're going to do that right now. So grab your basting cotton, thread a needle, and stitch a line 3/8 of an inch down from the raw edge. Starting off at the shoulder end, like so, and making sure that the raw edge of the cloth is butting up to the marked chalk line that we made on the thread mark. So as I'm basting just off 3/8, so either a bit bigger or a bit smaller than 3/8, so when I come to sew 3/8 in, I don't have a problem unstitching everything because it's caught in with the machine stitch. So I back tack at the shoulder end. Again, I'm only stitching my top cloth, and I'm slowly putting little bubbles of fullness in to ease that excess length in the back, which is there due to the fact that we are trying to fit a shoulder blade, and we're cleaning up the back size by darting an amount of cloth over the mound that they create. So basting just shy of 3/8 from the raw edge, making sure that my raw edge is matched up to my thread mark, come into my back neck and extend past it about a 1/2 inch. Back tack there, and once that's securely in place, go back over those lines with a back stitch between the locations where I've stitched, just to secure all that fullness in place and make sure that it doesn't shift as I'm sewing it by machine. Get that all in place like that. And then tack off. I'm now going to go to the press board. I'm going to shrink all of this fullness in, and then I'm going to machine 3/8 of an inch off the raw edge, so just inside of this tack line which I've made. And I'm only stitching top cloth to top cloth. So I'm freeing this off and I'm stitching down here. I'm going from a 1/2 inch past the neck point to all the way down to the shoulder end. I've now stitched that in place, and I'm going to remove my baste. Being careful not to take off my machine stitch. so. Take off my loose threads. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is get the shoulder on the sleeve board like this, and I'm going to press this seam open. I now press the seam open, as you can see, and my thread marks are lining up with one another on my back neck and my shoulder, and they're running into each other. My seam is flipped like so. So my inlay on the front is sent here forwards, and my canvas flops on top of it, like so. Flip that over. Our next step is to canvas the top of the forepart. So to do this, we thread up. Grab the coat, like so, under the hand, and we put padding stitches in place, starting from this line and heading up. And as we go up, we slowly ease a little bit of length out of the shoulder. Slowly but surely easing that length out. We're staying clear of the armhole, and we're just slowly easing a little bit of length out. Once I get to my shoulder seam, I come into it, back tack, and then come down that seam there, again making sure that I'm getting all of the length out of those spaces. Come in to my neck point here, ensuring everything is nicely eased out. So with my thumb I'm pushing ever so lightly, like so, and as we get into the end of the neck point I back tack, and I'm going to pad stitch firmly in place my neck point, like so, against my canvas. A couple of pad stitches there, which are going to sit beneath my undercollar, like so, and back tack in place. Check my work, make sure there's no fluttering in this area, which there isn't. It's nice and flat. That's great. You'll notice little bubbles of fullness here on the back shoulder. That's normal, but make sure that they're evenly distributed. We don't want any excesses. Now, ensure that you haven't caught your linings as you've done this, because we're going to slip the shoulder pad in next. So, grab your shoulder pad and make sure you've got a left-sided pad. The left-sided pad has a hole in the center here, which is slightly offset forwards. So the front of the pad is slightly shorter than the back. Okay. We're going to mark a notch where that hole is, and we're going to create a little triangle in there so that we can reference where the pad needs to lie, like so. I then get my linings out of the way and insert my pad like so. Grab a pin and position it at the shoulder end there. Like that. I then marry up the notch in my pad to the edge of that pin, like so. I flip this over and put another pin in right beside that to lock it into place. This one's going through the pad. This is through the pad, that's on the edge of the pad. I double check that the pad hasn't moved and that that notch is still sitting on the edge of the first pin. And at this point, I can remove this pin, hold that in your mouth. Don't hold it in your mouth, that's dangerous. I'm a bad example. Set it on the table, and what you want to do is make sure that the pad is running along the mark stitch that you see here. So rotate it inside the coat until it's sat within that mark stitch. Like that. So now my pad, when it's positioned in the coat, is sitting exactly up against that mark stitch. I flatten all of the cloth that sits on top out, and I put a second pin in, that same one that I had earlier on, over here, through the pad, a little further along. So now I've got the pad secured in place, and it's secured in place so it can't rotate. I then grab, again, still making sure that your linings are entirely out of the way, then grab a very long piece of thread, and I'm going to come and secure my pad in place. So starting from this point here, I'm going to tack in, and I'm going to flatten the cloth, like canvassing process, out against my pad, making sure that there's a slight deficit of top cloth along that length. And I'm securing the top cloth to my pad. Again, I'm pulling the top cloth ever so slightly out and securing my pad into place, making sure again that it's still not rotating and that I've got it butting right up against that seam. Again, pushing ever so slightly. Now, I'm not tacking to the lining here, I'm tacking away from the lining. I can feel the end of my pad here. I put my last stitch in, I back tack a few times, and I come back between those stitches to further secure that into place. I then continue that line all the way down to here, ensuring that I'm catching canvas and pad through the front here. Now that my pad is secured into place, I flip my forepart over and I'm going to stitch it down to the canvas. So get your linings out of the way, and we're going to pad this down on its edge. So coming from this side, I'm going to lay my pad in, make sure that it's all nice and flat, and I'm going to slightly fill my pad in, so push it in ever so slightly. Again, we're making sure that there's plenty of room in the pad so that it's not affecting the forepart, and I'm just going to baste or pad down my shoulder pad, just catching the canvas. all the way along its edges. Again, making sure that everything's laying nice and flat, and I'm filling it in ever so slightly as I'm going along. Can get a bit tricky with everything in place at this stage. You should be able to just insert it down. Like so. Back tack, and your pad is now firmly down. Now that that's in place, I'm going to baste a line down to secure the lining and the facing against the pad. So I lay this nice and flat, and I further secure this against the pad, making sure that it's not tight. Like so. And back tack. And I'll do the same across the front of the canvas here. Just securing it to the canvases, not the cloth, like so. The next stage is to mark the seam of my shoulder across. So transfer this over, pop a pin in here, a pin in there, like so, and then mark this to the other side, there and there. I then draw this line very lightly on, like so. Trim the excess facing down, making sure not to cut anything else. And then we're going to secure the back lining in place. So grab your thread and fold it down. So I grab a pin, I splay my armhole out like so. I ease my back lining, not tightly, but just into where it wants to fall on the front shoulder. Hold it in place, pop in a pin, like so. I then lay the body flat and fold this back, push that back ever so slightly, fold this back to that line and baste it down. And I'm not pulling at this stage, I'm just laying it flat and letting it go to where it wants. So this takes a little bit of wiggling, Just making sure that everything is nice and firmly in place. So you can stitch this down, catching the pad, making sure that there's no tightness, either in length along the backside or across the width of the shoulder. Once you get to the shoulder point, stop, and we're then going to pull back our facing in this section and line it up with our break line. Once that's firmly in place, you can continue that line of stitching just a hair further. Like so. We then check our work. Make sure none of your bases are coming out. By lifting up our jacket and making sure that we haven't included any tightness in this area. Checking the back side, making sure that it's not being pulled, and checking the shoulder, making sure that that's not being pulled either. Last step with the linings is to secure the edge of the back lining with the wing of the pad, that's the back of the pad. Tack in over here and include little bubbles of fullness as we go down. And feel the edge of the pad and secure it where it stops. Only securing to the pad. Again, check your work and make sure you're not creating any tightness. Great. Our next job is to fit the coat to the stand, pin it into place so that it drapes nice and neatly, like so, and that your shoulder is sitting flush all the way along. Grab your collar and begin to pin it into place against the neck points. Sorry, against the neckline. So, to begin with, I'm going to put the edge of my collar at the collar stand up against the edge of my cloth and pin it into place along my thread mark lines. Like so. Just to the cloth, and I'm going to put a second pin in there to make it stick against the mannequin. We wouldn't have to do this if we were making a full jacket, but because it's a half jacket it tends to want to come clear. So I'll put one pin in there to secure it to my cloth and one pin in there because it's a half coat and we want everything to sit flush. I then come round my coat, lining up to about halfway down the back neck with my neckline. Once I get to this point here, I then rotate the coat forwards and I let the collar sit into the break line. I make sure it's not tight, I just let it sit down, flush, making sure that it's hugging the neck all the way round. I then grab a pin, and as I go along, I lift up and I let the collar be pinned where it wants to naturally sit. Now that might not follow the exact neckline, and if it's sitting 1/8 off, that's fine. Just let it sit naturally where it wants to lie. Like so, all the way along, until you reach the base of the collar over here. Like so. You can see that that's sitting nice and flush, up against the back neck, all the way down through to the bridle. Now, if the collar wasn't sitting up against the back neck but was sitting off, you would have to round the collar a bit more. If the collar was wanting to butt too far into the back neck, then that's because the collar would be too rounded. It would get quite tight. If the collar were tight around here, that would be because the collar was too straight. Again, you would have to round the collar out. What other issues can you encounter? If you popped your collar on too tightly, you'll get a bubble down here and everything won't be laying flush. So these are things to look out for. If you were getting fluttering around here, you would have to shrink all this back in, i.e. straighten your collar. I've now unpinned my coat from the stand and I'm going to pad my collar down to my coat. I'm only catching the cloth, I'm not catching the lining. So move the lining out the way as you go along. But little pad stitches all the way along to secure your collar down. Ensuring that you're not catching your linings as you're going down. Coming into here and back tacking to the inlay of my back neck, and then again coming forwards, I'm only catching my canvases. I don't want to catch any linings at this stage. Coming all the way down. So, once I come to the bottom, I back tack. I then make sure that my collar is sitting nice and neatly into my break line. I lay my collar flat up against my lapel, making sure that it's not pulling, and I continue padding, only catching my canvases and at this stage my lapel. All the way down, like so. Back tack here. Remove my pins. And I'm then going to lay my collar back onto my coat and check it's still sitting nicely. Sorry, I lay my coat back on the stand, checking it's still sitting nicely. I don't know if I said that right. So my collar's now sitting nicely. I'm going to mark a point 2 inches in from where my gorge meets my peak and mark that onto my collar. I'm then going to mark a point which is 1 5/8 inches in from my fold edge at my shoulder seam, and I'm going to mark a point at the back, again 1 5/8 inches down from the centre back, from my fold edge to that mark down here. And then I'm going to draw. You can do this on the board. I'm going to do it on the mannequin for the sake of speed, otherwise I need to readjust the camera. I would recommend doing this on the board. Draw a line that marries all of these points up. Typically you would have a shaper. I'm going to provide you with one, but for the sake of ease here, I'm quickly going to get this done. So, I've now drawn my line through all the way around, like so. I'm going to mark where my peak meets my collar, mark my point in, and I'm going to cut this off on the board. So I've got my collar shape marked. I'm now going to trim this line all the way along, making sure that I'm cutting very smoothly. All the way down. I then cut along that line which I marked up to the point where my gorge meets my peak. I then flip this over, and at this point I'm going to rebaste a line down. So I can feel in here where my peak has this excess, and then I'm going to fill that down right beneath it, like so. Sorry, pad this down. I'm staying right beneath this area here, and I'm coming in, so I'll back tack here, and I'm coming in to meet the back tack that I made over there. Like so. I then release these stitches over here, and I mark the new shape of my undercollar coming in. So at this point here of intersection, I'm going to cut straight down like so, and I'm going to leave all of this little excess coming right below my padding. I then curve that slowly into the collar, and I chop this out like so, and then all along here, making sure that I'm cutting nice and neatly. Like so. So we now have our undercollar in place and shaped, we're going to lay our coat on a sleeve board and start shaping out the cloth that will make up the top collar. So I lay my coat flat like so that my collar is sitting nice and flat, like this. I ignore all the fluttering going on elsewhere. I want my collar to be flat. I then grab my my top collar, and I make sure that the arrows are going down the back. So the arrows are here, and I'm flipping them down the centre back. I then lay this piece of fabric over so that it covers all of these elements, but is going straight down my centre back with the grain. So one easy way to do this is it's different in a half coat, but I will lay this line in straight up against my undercollar, like so, on the edge, which I know is lined up with the grain. So I line this up like so. I lay my collar in so that it covers my entire undercollar, and I've got a little bit of access past the gorge, like so. There we go. And then I begin marking the undercollar in. So I can pin it in if I want, or simply lay it flat. And I'm going to mark the round of my inner neck, my fold edge. I'm going to mark my leaf edge in, lifting it up slowly. Like so. I'm then going to mark the point of my collar, the point where it meets my peak, mark the gorge in, all the way through, like so. I've now got a bit of cloth that looks like this, with all of my elements marked on. So I'm going to remark them a little bit more neatly so that I've got better references, like so. Again, I'm just being very light. And what I'm going to do is trim this. So I'm going to leave a good 1.5 inches around here. I'm going to leave about 3/4 of an inch at the gorge, and I'm going to keep going through. And then round the back neck, round the fold edge, I'm going to leave a good 3/4 of an inch. Like so. And round the leaf edge, I'm going to leave a good 3/4 of an inch. Again, these are arbitrary amounts which need to get trimmed out at a later date. I'm now going to go over to the press board, and I'm going to stretch this as much as I can. Now, I don't want to cause any rips, but I want to ripple this as much as I can, because this edge needs to be able to fold over and sit flat on the inside. You can now see my top collar and how much it's fluttering on that inside edge, and everything else is pressed up nice and flat. So we now come to stitching the collar on. With my needle. Grab my thimble. Right. So I need to ensure that I have laid my coat back down with the collar completely flat. Like so. On my sleeve board. So that's sitting nice and flat. Like so. I'm going to lay my collar back down into the marks which I made. Like so, making sure everything is nice and flat. And I'm going to begin by basting a few lines down to secure the top collar in place. So my first line is going to go through the middle of my collar all the way to my centre back. So I put back tack in, and I'm making sure that I'm just laying the collar softly down. I'm not pulling too tight, I'm just easing a tiny amount of length out of the top cloth. So it's not like the canvassing where you're pulling quite a bit. Here you're just teasing a little touch out. As I'm going along, just teasing that a little bit out. All the way. Going through the middle of my top collar. And I get to the end and back tack. My next stitch is going to be for my gorge. I'm going to fold this in and lay those seams up against one another, making sure I'm easing just a tiny amount of length out of this area. Back tack, making sure you're only catching the lapel, not the canvas underneath. Sorry, only catching the collar, not the body full part underneath, and just creating that seam at the gorge, like so. Once that's in place, I back tack right on the edge, like so, and then continue that line through the other side. Coming in, make sure that you get that fold in, and then stopping about a ½ inch in. Like so. My following line is going to be on my leaf edge, and what I'm going to do is just release the pads which are going to prevent me from separating the canvas from the melton till about a ½ inch in. So just that first round of padding, I'm going to undo until there. Like so, and maybe just this one here. Like so. I'm now going to pop a stitch around this side of my collar. Again, just ensuring that everything's laying nice and flush. And I'm just going through the top layer of the collar. I'm not catching what's underneath. I'm not pulling excessively tight. Get to the end and back tack. And then for my leaf edge, flip my collar round, make sure it's laying nice and flat, and cut round, leaving only about 3/8 of an inch all the way. Like so. And then trim the melton back about 1/8 of an inch from the canvas. Nice and neatly all the way along. Like so. So you can see 1/8 of canvas all the way along the edge. You then fold your collar back and lay the top cloth sandwiched in between the canvas and the melton. So I'm sandwiching that in, and then I'm popping a stitch in place. And the stitch is going through all 3 layers. It's going through top cloth, canvas, and melton. And it's catching all of that in place. Like so. Again, sandwiching that in, making sure it's nice and neat, and popping a stitch through all 3 layers, all the way along. Tack like so. I then grab a black thread like so. Reverse this collar, and I'm going to edge stitch it in, pulling it back on its fold edge. So coming in through here. I'm now going to start edge stitching about 3/8 of an inch from the fold. And as I'm edge stitching, I'm just going through the top layer of canvas and I'm pulling all of that back. Along the top edge. Making sure everything's laying nice and flat. Like so. Then back tack once I get to the end, and flip this over and make sure that my work is looking nice and neat. Which it is. I've got a nice neat edge over here. I'm then going to go over and press this in place and press these folds down flush. So I've now pressed these edges in, and I'm going to flip this over and pull all of that to the inside and pat it down. Like so. Making sure it's nice and neatly in place. And just put a little pad stitch in place over here. No need to go all the way through, just catch the Melton, or the Melton and the canvas. Make sure it's not tight. And make sure that this line here is heading inwards from the outside edge. Once that's in place, you can trim this back to about 3/4 of an inch, like so. And then when you flip it over, you'll see that you've got your collar formed. Like so. So now what we do is we fold this edge sorry, my lining got caught there, so I'll just move that out the way. So I move everything out the way, lay my collar nice and flat, and with the baste I now fold this edge over. making sure that all the thicknesses along this folded top collar are nice and even. Like so. Coming into the corner, and then back tack. And now, to secure my lining down, I push my lining up, so lay my back neck flat, push my lining up and flush, like so. Make sure that there's no tightness in here. Easing everything in nice and neatly. And just baste around right below that fold that I just made. Again, ensuring that there's no tightness there. You can even leave a little bit of excess, as we have done in the lining elsewhere. Back tack here, and then follow with a basting stitch over here. And back tack. You now check your work and make sure that there's no tightness. Which there isn't, that's great. If there were tightness, we would see an accumulation of length along the back neck over here, which there isn't. So I flip this over and I trim away the excess lining right on the edge, like so. I now grab a last snippet of cloth over here, and I'm going to cover this void here all the way in. So to start off with, all I'm going to do is lay the collar back flat, like so, and mark this shape in. So find your grain, which is over here, like so. So I'm laying that in, laying this along the grain, making sure everything's flat, and then marking the edges that I'd like to fold this to. So I need to come in here, here, there, there, and I can feel the folded edge as I come along. And I want this to be about a good ½ inch long all the way across, like so. I trim a good ¼ inch all the way around these marks. And I baste it down in place. Before I get to the end, I make sure I fold back. Like so. And tuck this in afterwards. So, and then fold back in place along the other edge. And trim this back a hair, just give it a neat fold in, so. Like so. And then all along this edge, we're just folding along, securing everything in place. You can flip this around at this point. Make sure everything is nice and even. I'm going to press this all in place, and then this would all get felled down either by the coat maker or the finisher.